I apologize. I've had two devices go down today, so I'm down to one phone. So you're not going to get to look up my nose. I'm going to have my picture up for this meeting. Erica, do we have everyone we need on this call?
Yes, we do.
Okay, wonderful. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and call us to order and ask for a roll call.
Sure. Past President Collin,
I'm here.
alternate Vice President Tipton,
Present.
Vice President Cromines,
Here.
and President Lopez.
Here. Great. Then we'll go ahead and kick this meeting off with our general manager and department manager comments. We'll go ahead and leave that wide open. Anybody that wants to go first, jump in.
Well, we had our first employee communication meeting today in lieu of the normal evening event we have every year. So we did have an event at Sun Street today for our Sun Street employees and our administrative employees. And we gave out awards to employees for longevity. So you might want to congratulate Caesar. He is our current oldest employee and got a 20-year award today. So that's great. Ray got 15, so that's almost as equally stellar.
Ernesto got 15.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ernesto got 15. So that's good news. We got some employees that have been around since almost since the beginning of the agency. So that's monumental. We also awarded our Employee of the Year to Oscar, who works in our operations group. He's one of our solid waste technicians, and I can't say enough about how hard he works. And so he received one of the Employee of the Year awards, and then Monica Ambrose, our HR supervisor, for all of her stellar work guiding us through the COVID minefields for the last 18 months. She also received, she was co-recipient of Employee of the Year. So it was a nice event. And we'll be doing a similar event down at Johnson Canyon tomorrow at 11:30. So if any of you are in the neighborhood, want to come by for some barbecue, we'll be holding the sister event down there tomorrow. That's all I have for tonight.
Thank you, Patrick. Any other department heads? All right, seeing none, we'll close that and head into our next item, which is committee member comments. Let's just go down the list here. I see Drew first. Drew, any comments today?
Not today.
All right. Christy?
Nothing from me. Thank you, Chris.
All right. Rob?
Nothing for me either. Thank you.
Great. Look forward to tomorrow's lunch. I will be there. Look forward to celebrating with everyone who's there tomorrow, and congratulations to Caesar and Ray for their longevity. We know that you're only halfway there, so keep going. With that, we'll open up for public comments. This is an opportunity for the public to share comments regarding items not on today's agenda. We ask that you use the raise hand function. It's at the bottom of your screen, or *9 via landline in order to be recognized. We'll ask that you limit your comment to 2 minutes. I do see a hand up from Felix Huerta. Felix, we're going to go ahead and you should now have the ability to unmute yourself. Go ahead and unmute yourself and share your comment with this committee.
Yes, Committee President. My name is Felix Mario Huerta Jr. I'm a union representative with the Operating Engineers Local Union Number 3. I just wanted to inform the Executive Committee that we have filed a petition to represent the Maintenance and Operations Unit employees over at the agency. And we'd just like to advise and to comment that any threats of retaliation, reprisal will be taken very seriously by the operating engineers. And so we just want to advise all administrative staff, all supervisory staff to not threaten, reprise, or intimidate employees in this unit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felix. All right. I don't see any other hands up at this time. Give folks one more second. See no hands going up. We will go ahead and close the public comment portion of the agenda and keep moving forward with our consideration items that begin with item 1, the minutes of our August 5th meeting. Is there any discussion from the committee? Hearing none, I'll see if there's any public comment on item 1. Okay, then bring it back for action by the committee.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Sure. Alternate Vice President Tipton,
Yes.
Vice President Cromings,
Yes.
and President Lopez.
Yes, motion carries. Thank you very much. We'll head into our next item, item 2 on the agenda, July 2021 claims and financial reports. We'll kick that over to 15-year Ray Hendricks.
Well, I'm actually at 16 years, but thank you.
We'll give you an extra one then.
Okay, so periodically I like to do this in a PowerPoint just so I can highlight a few numbers. Cash balances, next slide. Cash balances at the end of, what month am I looking at? July, I apologize, is 33 million. Most of it's restricted by legal agreements or committed through items. Available for operations, we're at negative 5.2 million. That's just a function of it being the beginning of the year. We transferred our capital improvement budgets over on July 1, as well as transfer money for the first bond payments towards the end of the month, so that they're available for the August 1st payments. The undesignated reserves is the balance at June 30th, which is allocated for future items, and that's when we go to the next item, that's actually where some of the new CIPs are going to be funded from. Next slide. All right, so for the month of July, we exceeded tipping fee revenues by 227,000. Diverted materials were just short, 2,900 total revenues are up 213,000. So far a moderately good start to the year. Next slide. Like I mentioned, July, we actually spend most of the money we spend in July is for the prior year. Just some the July payroll and the initial insurance premiums which are due, but as of July, everything is online. So unless there's any specific questions.
Any questions from the committee?
Nope.
All right, hearing none, let's take it out, see if there's any public comment on this presentation. Seeing no hands up, we'll close the public comment portion and bring it back for action.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Alternate Vice President Tipton,
Yes.
Vice President Cromings,
Yes.
and President Lopez.
Yes, motion carries. Thank you very much. Let's jump back into our agenda. And I believe the next item up is grants and capital improvement. So we'll kick it back to Ray.
Okay, so this is the annual item. Board approves the budget in March, this year in April. And we wait till we finish paying bills to the prior fiscal year to do our carryover adjustments and finalize the capital improvement budget. So we're gonna go just by function. Post-closure funds, we have remaining balances and the amounts approved in the budget, no adjustments. So final budgets are just shy of 1.7 million altogether for the 3 sites to manage post-closure care. Next slide. We have some CIPs for the autoclave and long-range facility needs EIR. Most of those with potential items may not be needed, but at this time we're just holding those budgets. Grants are all carryovers with the exception of the 2021 CCPP, which was actually approved last month by the board, but no adjustment to those budgets. Next slide. So the big one, capital improvement projects. We had 3.2 million left in the CIP budget, which is being carried over, in addition to 1.6 million in approved allocations. We are requesting 1.7 million in adjustments, and I'll go over them very briefly. 25,000 for the organics expansion study. So that's just needed to complete the work that was started for SB 1383 and studying biosolid potentials. The emergency generators, this item, the actual contract was approved last month with the pending budget adjustment that was coming. This is for the emergency generators at the organics plant and the flares at Crazy Horse and Johnson Canyon, in order to make sure that those systems can continue operating if there's a case of a power outage. So the additional contract plus some additional pad work needed, the adjustments 100,000. The 100,000 for Johnson Canyon partial closure. This item is actually not on the staff report, was added this morning. We've been working with Cal Recycle to allow us to use, to split the closure fund in order to manage the rolling closure that was brought forth to the board a couple of months ago by Brian. Unfortunately, we haven't been super successful. That rolling closure and that work is kind of integrated with the module expansion. We basically still have to dig dirt for the module expansion, but there is some CQA and other work that cannot, that has nothing to do with that work. So we're requesting $100,000 just so that we can track those expenditures. And if Cal Recycle allows us to dip into the expansion fund, we can transfer those over at that time. Johnson Canyon Corrective Action. We spent some money last year upgrading some of our wells. So we're just asking for 75,000 to kind of replenish that CIP, just so that we still have money available if other things come up. And skip down the Halone Road station improvements, 100,000. That's to upgrade the entrance road at Halone Road. We have some preliminary bids, and the money in that CIP isn't quite enough. So we're asking for an extra $100,000 allocation so we can do that. We did some patchwork last year, but that's temporary. And then with the potential closure of the Sunstreet transfer station, we want to start allocating some funds. We do not know that $150,000 is enough for whatever cleanup will be required at that site, but it's a starting point. So all those items I just mentioned, and I lost the total, unfortunately, but $700,000 in allocations would come from fund balance at June 30th. The $1.1 million in Johnson Canyon module engineering construction is the $5 per ton that we set aside so we can continue construction and kind of pay as we go on those. So total adjustments is 1.7, but like I said, 1.5 is built into the budget, where the rest is our one-time allocations from fund balance. So with that, if there are any questions.
Questions from members of the committee?
No, sir.
All right, let's take it out to the public, see if we have any public input on this item.
Nope.
Seeing no hands up, so we'll close the public comment portion and bring it back. The recommendation here is to forward this on to the full board. Is that correct, Ray?
Yeah, forward to the board for approval with recommended approval.
Okay. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Let's go ahead and take a roll call vote.
Alternate Vice President Tipton,
Yes.
Vice President Cromings,
Yes.
and President Lopez.
Yes. Motion carries. With that, we'll head into our next item, which is also a Ray Hendricks item, discussion on the potential for bond refinancing. And I believe he has some guests with him, so I'll let him do the introductions. Ray, back to you for item 4.
Thank you. This is a Ray Hendricks item, and I'm very happy to introduce John Pham, who will do the presentation. As I mentioned in the staff report, we have a potential for pre-funding our bond and saving a substantial amount of money. But I will defer to John and allow him to go through his presentation, and I will be here to assist with questions if there's any.
Hi, good afternoon. This is John Fan, municipal advisor in California. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I actually helped you finance your 2014 bonds as well. This presentation is going to walk you through the refinancing, how much money you can potentially save by refinancing your 2014 bonds. If you go to slide 1, just a summary of your prior bonds. So in 2014, the authority issued $31 million to refinance your 2002 bonds, which finance improvements to your various landfills. Today, there's about $23 million outstanding. The interest rate on that $23 million outstanding is about 5.45%. So relatively high to today's market. And as you probably know, interest rates are at all-time low. The final maturity of these bonds go out to 2031, and they can be prepaid in 2024. There's a nuance in the tax law that says that you can't issue tax-exempt refinancings until 2024 for this transaction. However, because interest rates are so low right now, many agencies and many municipalities are issuing taxable bonds to refinance their tax-exempt debt. And if you're able to refinance your bonds right now, the taxable rate is going to be around 1.65%. So as you can see, there's almost a 4% difference between what you're paying now and what you could pay if you did a refinancing. So if you can go to the next page. So just to review your annual payments today, you're paying about $3.1 million today, and all the way out to 2032. There is a little step down, as you can see in the chart, in 2028 of about 2.9 million, and then it settles at $2.7 million to the end of the maturity. So there's two options for refinancing that we provide here. Number one option is to do a level savings, meaning you take your annual savings if you do the refinancing annually. So if you do a level savings refinancing, your savings annually will be about $120,000. That's, as you can see, column A is what you're paying now, column B is what the new debt payments will be, and column C will be the savings, about $120,000. And that totals about $1.2 million over the life. In terms of present value, in today's dollar, that's about $1.1 million. And the reason why, as you can easily understand, is that the difference between the 5.5% interest rate versus 1.65% interest rate. And this is net of all fees. This includes cost of issuance of putting the deal together, the financing team. The next page. The second option we examined was leaving your debt payments the same, around $3.1 million, and shortening the maturity. So what you can do is still pay the same amount of payments today of about $3.1 million, but then you can shorten the maturity by 1 year. So if you look at column A, that's what you're paying now. Column B shows the debt payments at $3.1 million, but instead of maturing in 2032, the bonds mature in 2031. So you chop off 1 year of payments, which saves you $3.1 million in the future. So those are the two options that you have. There's another option that we didn't really review is you can monetize everything right now. And if you have capital projects, you can raise about $1.1 million without increasing annual debt payments. But I believe that these are the two options that I think is more preferable to your organization. The next page is just mechanics. I won't get into the weeds of this, but it's relatively simple. You issue a refinancing bond. You have two funds. One is a cost of issuance fund, which is paid at cost the day of closing for the attorneys and all the financing team members. And then you set up an escrow to escrow the principal and interest payment to the 2024 call date. So in 2024, the bonds are redeemed, and that is canceled. But this is done all the time in the municipal market industry, and this will be a full defeasance of your 2014 bonds. And that is it for the presentation. I'm happy to address any questions that the committee might have.
All right. Any other input, Ray?
No, and just to clarify, the savings on continuing to pay the 3.1 million is at 1.4 million in the final year, because we would, can you go back a slide? So if you look at column, the comparison between column A and B, we basically would continue to pay 3.1 million instead of taking that step down, since the 3.1 million is already built in a budget that would allow us to finish a year earlier with a net savings of 1.4 million. Yeah, all that being said, we're looking for direction. We're gonna bring this back to the board in a couple of weeks with any question, hopefully with answers to any questions or concerns that EC may have, and hopefully get approval to start the process. This is one of those items where I honestly didn't know this was even possible, because I had always looked at 2024 as the first time we could refund, but our sister agency, Monterey Regional, is doing something similar, which let us actually inquire whether it was possible for us.
All right, then let's go ahead and take it to the committee. I see a hand up from resident financial expert Robert Cullen.
Well, thank you. So 2 questions. The first question for John, I always like to ask the question of what risks, if any, we take on by doing either of these options, and then to Ray and staff in general of if they have a recommendation regarding which option.
And that's a good question. So let's say, putting together a financing like this, it'll take about 4 months. And as you know, the interest rate market can move. It's been relatively stable for the past year or more or so, but for some reason it could increase significantly. So you have the risk of putting together a financing but won't get done because the savings aren't high enough. So you would only close on the transaction if there's significant savings, and we can put parameters in the resolutions that says a refinancing can only be completed if X amount of savings or X amount of years or X amount of savings, right? So we can definitely put parameters. So the risk is we're a month, 3.5 doing the financing, and for some reason the rates shoot up and we can't do it. So what is the cost? So the financing team, I would say 95% of the financing team is contingent on closing, meaning we do not get paid unless it's a closed transaction. The only fee that you might be responsible for is the credit agency fee, meaning there is an outside party rating agency, kind of like when you get a FICO score, right? So you would have to pay them a fee, about $35,000 to assess your credit. So that fee is not contingent. So let's say in 3.5 months, rates shoot up, and this deal doesn't pencil out, you would be liable for that payment. But the way we'll try to set it up is we'll set that up later in the process when rates are, when we're closer to that day when we can close. And in terms of the interest rate market, rates are going to go up, but I believe that rates are going to stay relatively low for the next few months because, number one, the Delta variant, and number two, the geopolitical issues in Afghanistan. Of course, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do feel that we're still going to be in a relatively low rate environment. The other positive here is that we're talking about the short end of the yield curve, meaning that your bonds are only outstanding for the next 10 or 11 years. So the movement in interest rates for those years aren't as harsh, or if it moves, it's not going to move as much as or impact you as much as a long bond would.
And to answer your second question, you're looking at the option I would recommend. we've built in, the budget already has a full 3.1 million payment. We've paid that the last few years. So maintaining that in a budget going forward and essentially paying off the bond a year earlier would put us in a better financial footing sooner.
Great. Thank you both for that information and answers.
Ditto.
Any other questions or comments from members of the committee?
That answered mine.
Yeah, same. All right, then let's take it out to the public, see if there's any public input on this item. Again, ask folks to use the raise hand function. See no hands going up, we'll close the public comment portion, bring it back. And so in terms of this item today, you're looking for a recommendation in terms of the options. Is that correct, Ray? Or do you want to
Sure.
send both options to the full board?
I was intending to just, get any feedback and see if there is anything you wanted us to adjust or kind of look into before we brought back to the board. But we can narrow down the options if the EC feels strongly about one over the other.
I think we're good sending both as long as the presentation includes the answer to that key question from committee member Cullen about the potential risks and the strategy to move that further into the process in order to mitigate that potential cost or risk of running our credit score, so to speak.
Okay. Yeah, running them at the latest possible time to minimize the risk of the interest rates not working anymore.
Right. All right. And with that,
You got that, John?
Yeah, no, I got that. I agree with you.
All right, then with that, we'll entertain a motion to send this to the full board.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Roll call vote, please, Erica.
Alternate Vice President Tipton,
Yes.
Vice President Cromings,
Yes.
and President Lopez.
Yes, motion carries. All right, item number 5, discussion on future meeting protocols. Patrick.
Yeah, so this is bringing back the item from the last couple of months. At this point, we don't have any indication that the Brown Act exemptions are going to be extended past the end of September. But I'd like to turn to Council Sassano and see if she's heard anything. I think at this point, it looks like those are going to expire.
We have not heard anything. We checked again yesterday morning and it was still the same. But given the situation, it can change. We know we just have to keep checking.
Yep, absolutely. So with that in mind, we got to assume that after the September board meeting, we would be going back to live meetings or considering again hybrid meetings with board members participating remotely. However, with those waivers gone, you have to designate the location you'll be at if you are not going to be participating live. And of course, that means the members of the public can attend the meeting at your location, wherever that may be, your living room or on a beach in Mazatlan, wherever you happen to be for that board meeting. So I think the real discussion is around, do we want to go back to hybrid meetings or simply just go back to full in-person meetings? So there's 2 pieces of this. The first one is really the board members themselves and meeting. Of course, some of this will be dictated by health directives and changes that we may see going into the wintertime, new variants, other things that may happen. We may still need to restrict public access to keep the head count down and to allow for appropriate separation of board members in a live meeting. And with that, again, Erica has acquired an OWL system, very similar to what they use down in Greenfield. I'm sorry, Soledad. And it works very well. It allows for public participation remotely. I think there was general consensus when we raised that issue last time that everybody felt that's a good idea, would increase public participation. And if there are restrictions to the number of people or the amount of public we can have at a meeting, that provides an alternative electronic option. But in the long run, when this is all over and said and done, we're back to normal meetings, it still allows for enhanced public participation. People can come to the meeting at that point, or again, they can participate remotely. And that just, I think, overall improves public access to the board and the agency's activities. So we definitely would strongly recommend that. But at this point, I think the discussion is really around, I'm not even sure it's a discussion. We'll be going back to live meetings in August. But we can talk about the, I know the concern has been raised that some board members may still not feel comfortable coming back into a group setting. Do we want to entertain going back to the board and having that discussion, or making a recommendation to the board to have a discussion around the hybrid meetings, or do we just simply, we're back in session? So it's complicated. It's complicated. It's still a changing environment right now, but it seems that we're now going to be destined to go back to some kind of a normal meeting platform.
Thanks, Patrick. And you did just say August, but you meant October, correct?
I'm sorry. Yes, October. Excuse me.
Okay. So, I still think that we're going to have news on the 15th. So I'd love to keep that flexibility with you. I think after the recall thing is done, then things will shift regardless of the outcome. And so I want to make sure that you have that flexibility. That's sort of where I'm sitting, but I'd love to hear from other members of the EC.
Chris, what kind of other, we'll be going back to the same place? We'll be going to
Yes, Gonzales City Hall.
Gonzales City Hall. And have they put up the partitions and things of that nature in their city hall? Do you know?
Maybe Erica can answer that.
No, they have not. The chambers are still the same. The only thing they've done is for the public. They've separated the chairs and minimized to a few people within the chambers. But as far as the staff and board members, there's no partitions or anything that has been added yet.
Okay.
But that is something that we could do potentially. We could look into getting just portable partitions that we can bring with us if the city's not interested in installing something. So that's something we could look into if that's a concern, definitely.
Well, I went to the Monterey One water meeting this week, my week is running into itself, in person with the partitions. And, I felt perfectly safe, even without a mask. So, that certainly helped, just because you don't know who has been vaccinated and who hasn't. So, that would be my recommendation. I think the meetings work better in person, personally, than it's very difficult for me when some people are on Zoom and some people are in the room. But that's just an old lady talking.
Any input from other members of the committee? I see Rob's hand up.
Well, I'm soon to be an old man, so I'll agree with the old lady with everything she said.
Okay, now we've got the old delegation having put in their opinions. Anything you want to add, Drew, before we go to the public?
Hey, wait a minute. I'm just as old here. Just not on the committee as old. I'm actually going to say the same thing as we've been having a couple of meetings. We've had a couple of meetings of not of our council, but of the small groups that have been the hybrid type meetings. And they're very, very difficult to follow along with, especially when you've got 3 or 4 people in a room and then 3 or 4 or 5 people on Zoom. And it's hard to keep track of who's trying to talk and who wants to talk and focus on everything. So I actually agree with Councilmember Cromines that we need to go back almost to an in-person meeting format, and it's a little bit cleaner and neater that way. The hybrid format, I think, is problematic in that term.
All right. we've heard from the committee. Let's take it out to the public, see if we have any public input on this item. See no hands going up, we'll bring it back. And I agree. I think it's, given where we are, the need for some of those potential investments are definitely there in terms of partitions is necessary. And so I think starting to plan for that, but still giving that flexibility for the potential, if we do see spikes and do see increased cases, giving that opportunity to Patrick to make that call to keep us virtual. If the governor extends after the recall discussion, then I would want to leave that flexibility with Patrick in that case. Is there any concern from the committee about that?
No, absolutely. I agree with you. And Patrick, don't get me wrong. I think you're absolutely correct with letting the public participate remotely if they want to. I do definitely agree that allows for more public participation.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, we agree with that, I think. And personally, I want to see all of you. As much as I like these meetings, the convenience of Zoom, I prefer to see all of you in person. So looking forward to that day, even if we're behind partition. So Eric and I will start that process of looking at either talking with the city on their intentions going forward, because if they're not intending to do something, then we'll look at something that's portable that we could bring with us and provide that separation and maybe even how we lay out the chambers for the meetings, to create a little more space between people. So we'll work through that process in advance of the October board meeting. And then I think we'll touch bases at our September board meeting regarding the governor's actions, and whether there is going to be any extension that would allow for us to continue that. And then that might redirect how the board feels if those waivers are extended. So we'll keep that flexible. Thank you for adding that flexibility in, but we'll start planning with the intent that we may be going back into live meetings in October.
And I do want my own glass box, just so I can make my Hannibal Lecter jokes out of a glass box up there in the center of the room. So thank you for making that happen, Patrick. Just kidding. All right, then with that, I don't think we need action on this. I think it's just a discussion. Is that correct?
Correct. I got direction. Okay. That's all. Thank you.
All right, then having gone to the public, we will close item 5 and head into item 6, an update on negotiations for the site lease and transportation agreement with Republic Services. Go ahead and kick that back to Patrick.
Okay, I will try to make this fairly brief. This is really just an update at this point, but I'll start, again, by thanking the city staff and Republic for continuing to work very collaboratively. So we are making progress. We run into, as you know, with any kind of negotiation and such a major change for the agency, we do run into little stumbling blocks here and there, but we're continuing to meet regularly with individually and as a whole group. Michelle has been, our assistant counsel has been an absolutely fabulous job running point with the attorneys from the other side on the 2 agreements that we're focusing on right now, which I'll outline in just a minute. So the schedule, we're still trying to operate under a very tight schedule. And we're working very hard to try to meet that schedule. That would be to actually have these agreements back to the board, full board for consideration in September. I do not have agreements that are in a format yet that are ready for publication and discussion. So I'm going to just provide a broad overview of where we are in those 2 agreements and a couple of the items that we're having more detailed discussion around that are related to the agreements. So there are 2 agreements right now, and the primary one being lease. That is the most important agreement up front, because as you recall, last month, we signed an MOU with the city of Salinas. And one of the conditions in that is the city would rescind their notice to withdrawal, and they would agree to equalize green waste rates and work with Republic to facilitate termination of the old organics processing agreement that is no longer financially sustainable with the 1383 mandates. So as we've gone through these agreements, the goal again has been to align the actions with the city's upcoming consideration of an extension of the Republic Services franchise agreement. So that work has been ongoing at the city level. And our agreements, and specifically the lease agreement, is being aligned with that franchise agreement. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the lease, but the timing is really right now that we've committed to try to make, and I must say that try because there's still some hurdles to go through. We're getting over those one at a time. We think we can get there, but we're not there quite yet. And that is that we would take this back to the full board in September for consideration of approval. And then the following week, the city would take their franchise forward for council and public consideration. And everything, of course, is tied together with those agreements all being executed, not quite simultaneously, but in some kind of sequence where they're happening fairly close together. Should we not get to the final agreement in enough time to be able to give the board an agenda item you can actually read, right, that has the agreement as the staff report attached to it. The MOU did stipulate that we could try to consider having a special meeting maybe 1 to 2 weeks later to consider this if we need more time. So I say that's an if. I can't answer that tonight if we're there or not going to be there or not be there. We're just trying to get this done in good time, but also make sure that we're doing our due diligence. So I'll go through the three issues. Two of those are agreements. So the first one is the lease itself. So we're looking at a 15-year lease that's concurrent with the city's proposed franchise agreement that's coming up, with 2 potential 5-year extensions also tied to the city's decision to extend that 15-year agreement 1 or 2 additional 5-year terms into the future. So that's the general timing for the lease. There's some improvement requirements in there. The facility is a bit run down, is in need of asphalt in some of the areas that will be leased. And so there's some conditions and discussions in there around improvements that the public will have to make prior to the authority commencing their operations there. So things like asphalting, improving the building that will house our household hazardous waste facility. There's some improvements, some add-ons on there. There is a budget allocated within that draft lease to do those improvements. We've gone through that a couple of times with them and toured the site a couple of times and feel comfortable that that part of it, improvement side, is all reasonable and meets our needs. So we're continuing to share some other issues around the lease, and really part of this is just making sure we're protecting the authority in the event of something that we think is probably not very likely, but still we need to protect ourselves on that one. So a couple things there. The lease does stipulate that, if the city is unable to execute that new franchise agreement by a date certain, that the lease would terminate, meaning that if that franchise isn't approved, then our lease just terminates. We don't ever leave or move at that point. We're looking at similar counter conditions where we want to make sure that, for instance, the city doesn't rescind their notice, that leaves us hanging. We would want to have the option at least to terminate the lease. If the city were to withdraw from the agency any time during the term of the lease agreement, we would have the option to terminate. That's kind of an important one, only because if you think of that scenario, the city were to, say, 10 years down the road decide to withdraw, the authority is left operating a facility that's primarily serving the city of Salinas, and we don't have a member that's paying into that system at that time. So, and Republic seems fairly open to those ideas because it's fair. It's just fair, but it just protects us down the road. allows us to get out of that lease early if that were to happen. Also litigation, if Republic were to be approached or be involved in some kind of litigation associated with the facility that hinders our ability to use the lease space and to provide the services as outlined. We would want the option after some kind of a cure period to terminate that lease, because again, we're stuck operating something at less than full capacity, and we end up with stranded costs, employees, and potentially equipment. So those are some of the things we're negotiating right now on the lease. And then Michelle's working on a number of other issues, just general legal issues in the lease. So we have meetings coming up tomorrow and probably into the early part of next week to try to hammer out the issues around the lease. Because again, the lease is the trigger in our MOU with the city for them to have to rescind their notice and equalize green waste rates. It's the signing of the lease. That is the binding agreement the authority would sign, and we're off and running with that process. The second agreement is what they call the master transportation agreement, or the agreement with the authority to provide transfer services with our existing fleet for all materials that are destined for Johnson Canyon. So this doesn't include curbside recycling, that they'll be using a different trucking company to ship that to Monterey Regional, and potentially other items that they ship out to another location. It's only materials that are destined to, by flow control, to the authority's Johnson Canyon landfill. So that transportation agreement provides for the authority to provide that service, and also to be able to use, as needed, subcontractor haulers in the event we have trucks down, employees out, or some other circumstance that causes us to have to sort of backfill, one or two trucks during a brief period of time, very similar to what we're doing now. So they've agreed to allow us to do that as well. So all in all, the transportation agreement actually is just about finished. But there is one related issue that we're working through right now, and this is the issue of rate setting. So as you know, as we discussed the last couple of meetings, Republic, this is their facility, they own it. Their corporate policy is they own the facility, they control the cash, they control the rates. The only control we have in the rate setting for that facility is our own tipping fees, which typically make up around 70% of the customer rates there. So that's how the authority can effectuate change in rates, by control of our tipping fees. So just like everything else, we still effectuate some control, but we don't set the rates. We don't have rate hearings. This is a private facility. Caesar has surveyed a lot of facilities in the region, and particularly the other private companies that run transfer stations and landfills, like Recology, our past contractor, Waste Management, other Republic facilities. And the rates they're proposing are not out of line with other privately operated transfer and solid waste facilities. They are, however, more higher than our rates. That's always the challenge. And so when we talk about rate setting, there's a concern that we have, that we think we can mitigate, and that is when the rates are different, significantly higher than what people are used to at SunStreet, there is going to be the tendency for some customers to make a different decision. Those customers could choose to drive to Johnson Canyon. That doesn't hurt us. We still get the revenue. We just get it at a different facility. So we still get our processing and disposal fees there. They could choose to do something. They could choose to go to Monterey Regional. That would be the worst case scenario for us, because that's revenue we can't recover. So that's lost revenue. And then the third option is they do the wrong thing. And that, of course, is always a concern that, this could drive some people to increase illegal dumping or theft of service. meaning they'll go and put their garbage or trash or something into somebody else's property or their collection container, and it becomes somebody else's burden to pay for disposal of that material. Or they can, again, illegally dump. Those materials all do end up at the authority, one way or the other. And so at the end, we still get revenue for it. So from a fiscal perspective, it's not impactful. It's just the loss of customers that may choose to go to Marina. And we think that that is a likelihood that people that are in the northern part of Salinas, that is a more palatable option for them if they don't like the difference in rates or they think it's too high. And the people in the southern part, eastern part of Salinas will likely drive down to Gonzales because it's a wash from a driving time perspective. So we think there's going to be some loss of revenue, but because of the savings we have with this relocation and restructuring, we can absorb some of that. And so that this is sort of the tricky discussion we have to have is we are taking a little bit of risk that we don't know how much revenue we will lose or how quickly we may recover it. Because I think that in the long run, people will come back to convenience once they get over whatever concern they have over the large increases. But that is a real possibility. There'll be some challenges with that. So having said that, this goes back to the transportation agreement. The one sticking point in that agreement right now is the rate. So we've provided Republic with a rate. It is our fully loaded rate. There's no profit margin in there. It is our fully loaded cost for truck driver, fuel, O&M, equipment replacement, overhead. You know, it is, as we've said with a lot of our programs over the years, you know, we work to try to make things as independently sustainable financially as possible. So we don't rely on imported waste, or we don't rely on tipping fees to pay for something that's not associated with the landfill directly. And transportation of waste for a private garbage company is not a landfill project. It's a trucking project. So with that all said, our rates are higher than the rates that they can get on the private market. So what that means is there are really three options that we're discussing right now. We'll be discussing with the board on that can mitigate that concern so that we would maintain that part of our operation. The first is, and this is probably in order of least, well, I won't say they're in order of least attractive, but one that was suggested obviously is we continue to maintain some level of subsidy. So for instance, they have a pricing structure that's a few dollars a ton less than ours. And we could continue to just pay their lower, or have them pay us their lower rates equivalent to their private sector rates. And then we would absorb and subsidize the difference. That's just exchanging one subsidy we're getting rid of for another one. So that's probably not something that we feel comfortable recommending to the board. Because it doesn't solve the issue of eliminating subsidies. The second option is we just get out of the transportation business. That unfortunately requires some reductions in staff and liquidation of equipment. Without that, because that's where most of our operating employees are moving to right now. They're moving from operations into transportation. So that option again has very negative connotations. And then the third option that we came up with that Republic does seem to be open to is that we reduce our tipping fees by an equivalent amount that would help keep their rates down, because the challenge they're having now is they've got rates established with Salinas for this draft franchise agreement that were based on their lower private sector transportation costs. And so the city ratepayers would have to pick up a higher rate on their bills to be able to allow us to continue to provide that service. The other option is we can reduce our tipping fees by an equivalent amount that basically creates a counter reduction that keeps the city rates, proposed rates where they're at right now. And the benefit of that is that rate reduction would be across the board. So it would also benefit the rest of the members. So if we dropped our rate to say $64, $65 a ton, you know, that's a $2 or $3, $4 reduction. That would get passed through all of the members, right? We wouldn't do this. We wouldn't do it just for Salinas because that would be a subsidy. We do it for all the ratepayers. So we think we can do that. But again, I want to circle back to that comes with a little bit of a risk. And that is, one, that's less revenue. So we have to build a budget on something less. And if we don't lose too much self-haul revenue from Madison Lane, we think that can work. But there is going to be a break point where we lose too much of that revenue and we have to start doing cost-cutting measures and you know, reducing spending and those kind of things until we can go back and get another rate adjustment and bring those rates back up. But we think right now, based on the trajectory and the fact we've had successive good years in a row, we can do this. It will make for a tighter budget next year, a little more cost control. You know, we're going to have to, you know, just tighten our belts a little to make sure we get through that first year and sort of see what happens. Because I don't have a crystal ball. None of us have a crystal ball on how our 140,000 customers to Sun Street or 116,000 paying customers to Sun Street, how those people are going to react to a significant change in rates. That's the unknown. But we think we could do a reasonable reduction in the tip fee and work through that for a year to see what happens. And if it's worse than we anticipated, you know, we can use some operating reserves to get us through the end of the 22-23 fiscal year, and then come back for an appropriate adjustment to adjust us back to reality, whatever that reality may be. So again, if we lose, you know, Ray has modeled different losses. You know, there's status quo, which this will all work. I mean, under status quo, if all the customers came back and we lost no revenue, we would end up with again a reasonably healthy surplus, just not as good as it's been in the past years, because we'd be giving up some of that with the rate reduction. But we want to benefit everybody and get away from subsidy. So we think this is the best path forward. But I just have to advise you, there's potentially some risk there. And again, we can mitigate that risk during the first year and see what the experience is on self-haul revenue from the Salinas area, and whether that it's dramatically reduced or it's manageably reduced. So as you can see, everything's all sort of bundled together. It's been a very complex set of negotiations, a lot of moving parts, but we think that there's a solution here, and at least we've heard back from the chief negotiator for Republic that they seem to be okay. They like the idea of the reduced tipping fee, and they'll have to obviously consult with the city because they're still in final stages of their negotiations. But I can only say I got a positive response to that suggestion. And we certainly don't want to talk about continuing subsidies. I don't think that's the right thing to be doing, and certainly want to maintain our workforce as is and provide all the opportunities to relocate all of our operating staff over to the Madison Lane operation. So with that, I'll stop for a minute and just take any questions you might have.
Questions from members of the EC?
Tons.
Go for it, Christy.
So the way I'm reading this is a transport fee, essentially, of an additional $16, 15, whatever. And it appears that would just be for Salinas. So like King City wouldn't be, is King City going to be paying a transport fee? Or is this just something that you'd be tacking on to this facility?
That's a good question. No, actually, we have a transportation fee already in our rate schedule that the board approves every year. And that is a service we've been asked to do. It's not a service we're mandating or a service that we direct. The haulers, both the city of Salinas and Republic Services back in the day in the early 2000s had asked the authority when we opened up Sun Street if we could begin to take some of the city haulers' garbage for them. So we got into this business because we were asked to get into it. It wasn't a standard, it wasn't the authority's original plan. It's just to have a public service facility. But we got into the business of transferring franchise garbage. And the same thing happened down in Madison or down in Holone Road. And so in Holone Road, right now, customers are paying, rail have to pipe in, I think it's $18 a ton. That includes both the transportation and the truck, plus the cost of loading the trucks. Now, in this case, we're just a trucker. Republic Services will maintain control and operation of all the interior operations at the facility. They'll load our trucks. We're just using our existing fleet and staff to continue what we've been doing, and that's to move materials from the Salinas, greater Salinas area in North County down to Johnson Canyon for either landfilling or processing in the event of organics and construction demolition material. So this is a transportation. We've always had transportation fees, but this is a reduced fee.
So Patrick, this isn't $16 a ton on top of the $18.75 you've been charging. This is instead of.
This is instead of, yeah.
Correct.
It's slightly lower than what we're charging now, but it is above their private market rates.
Yeah, which is about $12 a ton, correct? Something like that.
Yes.
Okay, so I know you said you wanted to stay away from subsidies, but I'm just throwing stuff against the wall, see what sticks. Because we're going to be fully paying our organic waste that's been subsidized by our AB 939. You know, is that a subsidy that we then could use for this?
No, that is for non-landfill. That would be an inappropriate use of 939 fees. Those are for specifically for diversion-related programs. So.
Okay.
And actually, Christy, just to add on to that, the AB 939 fees actually don't fully support that program, which is why we're suggesting reducing the tipping fee just to kind of offset that increase initially.
Yeah. And you have a meeting tomorrow with them?
We have meetings nonstop right now.
Yeah.
Spent my whole drive home on phone calls with our legal team and Republic Services. So it'll be like that probably for the next couple of weeks until we get these things hammered out. But we're making progress. I mean, on positive notes, we are making good progress right now. We haven't hit anything that's a solid impasse. But when we look at
well, because ultimately for me, it's about the ratepayers, and and I'm being told that's about a 25%. It would be about a 20, because they're going to pass it through to my ratepayers, and now we're talking about 20, another 25% on what they're already paying, which is going to go up. So, so I'm just looking for solutions. And anything you guys can do to make that work with Republic, I'd be very, very curious to be included in on as you're talking to them, what's going on.
Yeah, we're keeping Jim and Steve, and they're involved in this, and they're scheduling regular meetings, and we're having site conversations as appropriate as we talk through this. So I think when we look at this, the whole issue is about risk. What risk is easiest to mitigate? And, we think at this point, the reduction in the tipping fee, small reduction, not a massive one, but we're looking at 7-8% reduction in our tipping fee, translates out to an improvement of rates overall for customers. And it also benefits our South County and county members because, we're not talking about lowering that just for Salinas. That's a subsidy. We're talking about lowering it for everybody. And
Right.
that is the easiest managed risk, but it is a risk because we don't know what's going to happen with self-haul tonnage because the rate differentials are significant enough that we think people will make other choices. Whether they make those choices permanently or just, they, decide that the convenience is worth the extra money. Those are just, I can't make a prediction, but
Yeah.
we think we can manage the risk better.
Well, and I do want to say, I think that has a lot to do the marketing plan that we've been talking about as well, and having a good marketing plan. And I'll say again, Salinas, is dedicated to being part of that marketing plan to make sure, we want to make sure that there's no to minimize the amount of illegal dumping that we possibly can. So, we're dedicated to being part of that marketing plan to get it out to, Salinas wide, and make it a big deal, that this is a, great new opportunity for them.
Right.
And also the other added thing is a lower tipping fee, slightly lower tipping fee could incentivize people to actually continue to stay within the system, which should hopefully minimize the amount of tonnage loss.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think having the authority really at the front end of that facility, which is where we'd be located, gives customers a much more convenient opportunity to recycle more, do the right thing, try to separate more materials and get their pricing down. So I think there's a counter, argument there too, that having us in the front, at the front of the house instead of the back of the house makes us much more visible, and those services are already funded through our 939 programs. So
Right.
that gives customers an opportunity to do the right thing and gives us a chance to really enhance our education because we'll touch more people that way. Because they'll go to us first before they go and pay for disposal. So I think all in all, I think there's a lot of great messages we can do to try to encourage people. But there is going to be some sticker shock, and we can't get around that. But Republic's rates, we found them to be consistent with other private facilities. It's just that our customers have been used to, paying a much cheaper rate that's part of a system cost and not a transfer station cost. And so
Yeah,
it's just,
and this is
run
going to
our-
be my last comment, Chris, I promise. And that's going to be on the rates. And I hate that, they're going to have to pay more. At the same time, it happens to be coming at a good time for us as an organization because everything is more expensive right now. So people are kind of getting accustomed to everything being more than it used to be. So it may be a very good time for that to happen. And that's my final comment.
Thank you, Christy. Any other comments? All right, let's take it out to the public. See if there's any public input on this item. Seeing no hands up, we'll close the public comment period, bring it back. And I think on this, you were just looking for conversation, or are you looking for, I see on the agenda, appoint a representative?
Oops. I think that was a typo.
I think the
Okay.
appointed representative was item 6 from last month's agenda.
Yeah, I know, but I had to call it as I see it. All right, then I don't think we're going to appoint a representative. We've got the right crew working on this. Anything else you're looking for from us in this open session, Patrick?
No, at this point, it's just an update. I guess I want to turn it over and ask Michelle Sassano, our counsel. I don't know if you have any things you'd like to add to the discussion, Michelle, that I didn't cover.
No, I think you've covered everything generally that we spoke about.
Great. Nope, this is just an update, and hopefully we'll be able to fine tune this a little bit more between now and the board meeting. But again, we have the option, if we need more time, I just want to keep everything flexible. We may have to call a special session a week or two after in the event we run up against the wall. So I want to make sure the board has plenty of time and your respective cities to have time to look at these agreements. This is quite honestly, it's primarily a Salinas issue, a Salinas-centric issue in terms of the rates. These are Republic's rates, and Madison Lane serves 95% of their customer base, as is ours, our Salinas residents. And so this is for those in the South County and the unincorporated county, you come to Johnson, you come to Holone Road, you're still going to pay whatever the authorities published system rates are. And that option is always available to people. But we really want to encourage people to actually go to Madison Lane, because we're going to have the full complement of services there. Because that was one of our starting conditions with them, that when we move over there, we want to make sure you provide the full comprehensive list of services that we provide at Sun Street that everybody's grown so accustomed to. And they've been really willing to do that. And so we'll be bringing that experience and hopefully our customer base with us.
Thank you, Patrick. Then we're going to move to the next item 7, the future agenda items.
Pull that up, Erica. So again, I think September, depending on how things go in the next week, there's possibility we may move a couple of these items over to October, so that we have a lot of time to focus on this at the September board meeting. But we'll have to play that by ear over the next week to see how close we get to final agreement. So a few items we do want to bring back and start discussions with the board on starting our strategic planning process back up. We just want to make sure we've gotten past this, so we may push that back. Push it back a little bit and have that discussion maybe in October, just to make sure everything's done and we're all back on status quo with each other. So, but that will be a perfect time. We really think getting strategic planning going now is pretty important, especially with this change coming at us in the spring or early summer. So that'll be one area. But yeah, we have our annual report, but I think that's going to get pushed back to October as well. Recognition of employees. You heard tonight we had small meetings, so we'll be bringing those back for a formal presentation to the board. And again, the big discussion will be around these two agreements and trying to move forward with the relocation. So if there's anything on there you'd like to add, subtract, move, you can let myself or Erica know.
Any input from the EC? Seeing
Not at this time.
All right, let's see if we have any public input on this item. See no hands, we'll close this item. And at this point, we are at the closed session portion of our agenda. So we do have an item on this evening's closed session agenda that we do still, actually 2 items that we intend to go into closed session for. Is that correct, Patrick?
Yes, it is. So if you can take public comment, we'll be ready to roll.
All right, then we'll go ahead and open it up and say if there's any public input for the 2 closed session items. Now would be the time to raise your hand and let us know you wish to be heard on the closed session agenda items. I see a hand up from Felix Huerta. Again, we'll limit to 2 minutes. Felix, you now have the ability to unmute yourself. Please unmute and share your comment now.
Yes, Chair, I just wanted to make a brief comment, if I could, about point number 9. As I indicated, we did file a petition in the cover letter that we sent to the general manager, CAO Patrick Matthews. We were very clear about the need to maintain status quo with regard to wages, benefits, and conditions of employment. So I strongly urge you not to speak in closed session about any sort of wage or benefit changes, either positive or negative, as it relates to non-management. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. I don't see any other hands up at this point. So we will at this point recess to closed session, and we will reconvene after in order to read out from closed session if appropriate. But at this point, I'll ask EC members to look at your emails around 2:02 today. You should have received an email with the closed session link. At this point, we're recessed to closed session. Thank you.
Thanks.
think
Eric, I
everybody,
think Michelle's over on the public side of the attendees list. If we could promote her over.
I just moved her over.
Perfect. Then we're going to go ahead and reconvene here in the open session for the EC Committee for the Solid Waste Authority. And with that, I'll turn to council to see if there's anything to read out from closed session.
There's nothing to report out of closed session.
Wonderful. That being the case, we're going to go ahead and adjourn. Thank you all for your time this afternoon and evening. We'll see you all soon.
all right, thanks, everybody.
Thank
Peace.
you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Everyone.
Good night.
Right.